Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's presentation, Strategies to Cope with Loneliness during the COVID-19 pandemic. My name is Michelle, and I'm the Program Coordinator at Waterford Place Cancer Resource Center. Waterford Place provides programs and services free of charge for anyone impacted by a cancer diagnosis that support whole person care. I'm very happy to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Yasmin Asvat. She's a clinical psychologist and an assistant professor at the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at Rush University Medical Center. So thank you so much for being with us this evening and presenting such valuable information on a very important topic.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm happy to be here with all of you, and I think we're probably all in the same boat that we hope that by this point, perhaps this topic wouldn't be necessary anymore, but unfortunately it still is, as we're still dealing with this ongoing pandemic with COVID-19. Soon it'll be almost a year since it started impacting our lives, and over the past 9 months or so, it has been really challenging for all of us to strike a balance between maintaining our social connections and our activities and being safe. And so one of the things that oftentimes we're hearing about, especially as psychologists, is that folks are really struggling with feelings of loneliness. And so we'll talk about that a little bit today. This is not going to be new information for any of you if you've been following the news, but the pandemic is not just in the US, but certainly a global crisis. Here in the US, it's impacted over 23 million people. I think that number is even higher at this point. And we've had a staggering over 400,000 deaths from this virus. And so all of these factors that are listed below, including unexpected nature of the pandemic, it really sort of blindsided us, and it's been of such a long duration with a high number of deaths and such a negative impact both on social and economic life. It really heightens the stress level associated with coping with this unusual, unprecedented event. And while we have some good news on the horizon with the COVID-19 vaccines, which are highly effective and are being distributed a little slower than we would like, but it's moving along. Hopefully that will mean that there's some end in sight to our current living situation, but in the meantime, we're all still needing to be cautious, maintaining social distancing, which can oftentimes lead to social isolation and feelings of loneliness. And so while it's so important for our public health to maintain that physical and social distancing, again, consequences can include feelings of loneliness. We might feel really disconnected from our social support systems. We're all dealing with a higher stress level given how disrupted our life has been. And for some of us, it may lead to even more challenging feelings of sadness, depression, anxiety, feelings that might interfere with our ability to engage with our day-to-day life to an even greater degree. So in this context, with our routines being severely disrupted, our usual coping skills are overextended, not only because of the nature of what we're dealing with, but just how long-term it has been. And for many of you here, not only are you coping with this pandemic, but also with cancer and the disruption and the stretching of coping skills that is involved with going through a cancer diagnosis. So, question for all of us is how we can adapt and expand our coping abilities during this time. And I'm sure you're all asking yourself that questions on a day-to-day basis. And I'll go over some strategies that I think are just good to think about as we're trying to think about how to cope with loneliness and some of the other emotional challenges that we might be going through during the pandemic. But also, I'm hoping to have some time at the end for a discussion so we can learn from each other and think about strategies that have helped you and sharing those with others, because I think that's one of the most impactful ways of learning and expanding our own coping repertoire. So the first thing that is helpful in general when we're dealing with any stressful situation is to pay attention to care for our body. Our body is feeling the impact of all of the stress that we're experiencing. Our fight or flight response is on high alert. And so caring for that body with a little extra attention is always helpful. And that includes a combination of nutrition, hydration, exercise, and sleep, which are some of the most basic foundations for our overall physical health. And I think when we think about each of these areas, we can also think about how can we engage with these in a way that can also help us deal with loneliness or can help us be social in some creative ways. So when we think about healthy nutrition and hydration for a healthy immune system, you might also think about, maybe this is a good time to try a new recipe or a new cuisine, or ordering takeout to support local restaurants that are struggling. And that can help both support our health as well as incorporate something new and different into our life, which in and of itself will help cope with the sense of loneliness that we're dealing with. In the warmer months, it might be really engaging to think about planting a vegetable garden or herb garden. Not only will you be able to incorporate those items into your foods, but it will also offer an activity that is fairly safe for most. That being said, for some of our cancer patients that are very immune compromised during chemotherapy, probably not the best idea to be gardening. So if you are in active treatment, check with your physician. But if you're well out of treatment and a survivor, very safe activity to do. And I've had some people even tell me that they have tried to get creative about how to still have some social activities around food. So much of our life and so much of our social connection centers around food, and I think that's something that people are really missing. And so, people have gotten creative with ideas for physically distant potlucks where they'll plan with their family or their friends or their neighbors that each person will prepare a dish and portion it out in containers and just drop it off at other people's homes. So there's a sense of sharing in our joy of food, sharing it with other people, and then maybe having a conversation about how different individuals enjoyed the food or I guess did not enjoy the food, as the case might be. We're not always fans of every single food item. The idea being using some creativity to still connect with that sense of shared experience with food. When it comes to exercise, it's well known. We've heard it since we were children, how important it is for both our physical and mental health. And I think it's important to think about how to continue to incorporate exercise into our daily life in a safe way. We certainly have plenty of offerings on YouTube and all the different exercise apps and videos that are out there for doing some classes at home. When the weather is nice, it's perfectly reasonable to wear a mask and go outside for a walk, as long as you're in a space that allows for social distancing in your walk. Or thinking about joining those virtual exercise classes at Waterford Place or your local health center, so that you're at least, you're able to maybe even plan with friends or neighbors, hey, let's go to these virtual class together and have a sense of socialization, even though it's virtual and distance. Is it going to be as satisfying as it would be to go to an exercise class with a friend live? Absolutely not. But is it going to be better than not having an activity with your friend? Most likely, yes. And then finally, for caring for your body, really important to make sure that we're getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep. Sleep is the foundation for both physical and mental health. That time of rest and recovery and healing is really important, both physically and emotionally as well. You've probably all experienced a time when you weren't able to get enough sleep, or were a little sleep deprived and were perhaps a little more irritable the next day, or found it more difficult to handle life stressors the next day, you could probably link that very directly back to the sleep deprivation. And so make sure that you maintain whatever is a helpful and relaxing bedtime routine. A good piece of advice that I know folks have heard but is worth repeating because it's so important is to avoid electronics at bedtime. A lot of people have a habit of having the TV on and falling asleep with the TV on. While it might seem reasonable, unfortunately, the blue light that's emitted from electronics interferes with the parts of our brain that regulate sleep. And so in the long term, it's much healthier to avoid electronics at bedtime. If you need some noise to fall asleep, you can try having some music in the background or a white noise machine. And if you need an activity that just engages your mind so that we're not having a lot of worries or recurring thoughts at bedtime, reading is always a good option. And practicing any relaxation or meditation strategies are good options as well. And certainly if you need help, if you find that your sleep is getting more and more disrupted, or your sleep cycle is maybe shifting, or now you're falling asleep at 3 or 4 in the morning when you usually fall asleep at 10 or 11, these are times when you might need additional help, and you can consult with your doctor or with a psychologist. There's a lot of behavioral interventions for sleep that don't require medication, and that once we get the hang of them, it can really help us promote healthy sleep. The second, I think, important piece is to remember to care for and honor your emotions with some self-compassion in the mix. We are all human and we are all struggling right now. There is not a single human being in this planet that's not on some level struggling with this pandemic. And it's important to extend yourself a little bit of comfort and kindness. Allow yourself days when maybe you're not feeling very motivated to do a whole lot and would rather spend time on the couch watching TV or reading and relaxing. That's okay. Allow yourself to have days when maybe you are not feeling like talking to a lot of people or calling a lot of people. That's okay. Those moments will come and go and ebb and flow during the pandemic. And it's okay to allow ourselves room for a little quiet time, some reflective time. It's okay to give ourselves times to just vent and express just how frustrated we are with the situation that we're living right now. And as we do that, it's also important to balance it out, with a little bit of room for hope. Anything that can nurture some hope for the future is welcome and is going to help us persevere through this period of difficulty. Whether that's hope that you can go on a vacation later this year if things look like they're a little safer, whether that's hope that you'll be able to visit with your grandkids soon in person once everybody's vaccinated, or whether that's hope that you'll be front of the line for folks who are next in line for the vaccine. Anything that nurtures a little bit of hope for the future, I think is welcome during this time. In relation to that, think about how to recharge your emotional battery daily if possible and very intentionally. As we live our lives, we all tend to do these things naturally and very unintentionally. We may have activities in our usual life, in our usual routines that help us recharge and help us recover emotional energy. But given how disrupted we are right now from our usual routines, we may really have to be so much more intentional than we are used to when it comes to recharging our emotional batteries. And so whatever that is for you, that really is very individual. For some people, it's making sure they exercise as a stress reliever. For some people, it's engaging in moments of mindfulness, meditation, deep breathing, or other relaxation exercises. For some people, it might be making sure they're connected with their hobbies, whether it's cooking or knitting or something artistic, or singing, anything that's a hobby of yours, it's important to stay connected to very intentionally, even during pandemic times. It's always a good reminder that music and dancing are good for the soul, that poetry, that literature, anything that will be engaging and inspiring in some way is always good content to try to consume and help us recharge. For some people, that will be spiritual or faith-based practices and finding ways to stay connected with that, whether it's through virtual services at their place of worship, or having an opportunity to speak to their faith leader one-on-one on the phone or over video, or just your own private practice of your faith or spirituality. Keeping that very much part of your day-to-day is important. Certainly, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a future slide, but maintaining virtual social connections. Again, I empathize, and we're all in the same boat here. The virtual connections are not as satisfying as in person. Unless somebody is an extreme introvert, there is absolutely no way that a virtual social situation is going to be as satisfying as an in-person live one. But during this time period where we're balancing our emotional and social needs with health and safety concerns, it's usually better than having no connection whatsoever. In relation to recharging your emotional battery, I also think it's worth noting that you're allowed to give yourself permission to set boundaries with people in your life who may drain your energy excessively. I think we oftentimes feel that we have a duty to the people in our life to be there for them and to connect with them and to listen to them. And that's all true, and it comes from a place of kindness and caring. But it's also okay to protect yourself. If there's times when there's individuals that may be taking more energy out of you than they're giving in return, allow yourself to set boundaries. And that doesn't mean we necessarily cut people off or out, but it might mean that we limit how much contact we might have with them. If you're trying your best to recharge your emotional batteries on your own and you're finding that you're struggling with maybe more severe depression or anxiety, just a reminder and an encouragement to seek professional help if that is necessary. So the next point that I hope is helpful, and I think this is the one that on some levels the most impactful, is to really attend to connecting with what matters. And there's always a way, so we need two things. We need some clarity on what our priorities are and what it is that matters to us in life. So that moment of just being able to reflect on what matters to me, what are my priorities, being able to name them and label them so that you can, in a way, visualize your personal compass. And that's very unique to you, right? It could include things like family, kindness, faith, love, wisdom, creativity, compassion. So once you have a sense of what are the values and the things that most matter to you, then you can ask yourself today, how can I connect with what matters most in some fashion? And importantly, there is always a way, always. And I'll give you an example, not related to the pandemic, but related to coping with cancer. I had a patient once who was an avid soccer player. She was in various intramural leagues, and that is what gave her life, is to be able to play soccer. And she was at a relatively young age diagnosed with colorectal cancer, and went through some surgeries and treatment, and physically could not play at the competitive level that she was used to. And it was heartbreaking, and it was such a major loss. And when she was able to think about it, she recognized that as much as she loves playing soccer, The real love is the love for the game, the love for soccer itself. There were other ways she could connect with her love for soccer that didn't necessarily involve her physically playing. Was it a loss? Absolutely. Did she miss it? Absolutely. But was it also helpful to her to be able to go to games and watch her friends play? Yes. Was it also helpful to her to be able to coach her nieces and nephews in some backyard soccer? Absolutely. Was it also helpful to her to be able to, go watch soccer games on television and still engage in that excitement? Absolutely. And so being able to answer this question of today, how can I connect with what matters most with some flexibility, creativity, and adaptability, and a focus on what is possible versus what is not possible is going to be really important to help us cope with this pandemic and come out the other end of it with a sense of it wasn't a total waste of a year, right? That's the saddest thing, to think that it might be a year where we don't connect with anything that matters to us. And so the more flexible, creative, and adaptable that you can be, the more you'll be able to recognize, okay, not only am I proud of myself for doing this, but I was also able to, in the middle of what is a really difficult situation for the country and for us personally, I was able to still connect with the things that matter the most. I think a lot of us have to challenge ourselves, especially the holidays, to think about that, to think about how to still connect with our families and our traditions during the holidays with some flexibility, creativity, and adaptability. And I would love to hear from all of you in the Q&A section what you did, because I think that's how we learn the best, is to hear what other people are doing to be flexible, creative, and adaptable during this time. So as we think about coping with loneliness, it's also helpful to consider how we can contribute to the well-being of others. Most of us benefit immensely from thinking about how we can support other people, whether that's family, neighbors, friends of our community. So as much as we might be in a position where we would like people to check in and we would like some support, we don't really have a whole lot of control over what other people do in relation to reaching out to us. But we have 100% control of what we do in relation to reaching out to others. And whether the connection is initiated by you or is initiated by the other person, at the end of the day, you will achieve the connection. So to the degree that you can think about when you can take the initiative to maybe call and check in with friends and loved ones, that's going to help your sense of decrease your sense of loneliness and increase your sense of connection. I've heard from a lot of patients that I work with that they're connecting with people that they may have not connected with in a long time. I have a patient who had a Zoom reunion with folks that she was in the Peace Corps with 40 years ago. And so it was just a real treat for her to see folks that are all over the country that she hasn't seen regularly in a long time, but they had that shared experience in their 20s of being in the Peace Corps, and they were able to reminisce and just check in about how they're doing today. So thinking about even those people that you may not connect with regularly, but this might be a welcome time to reestablish those links. Some of us might also think about how we can contribute to people's well-being with donations, whether it's time, food, money, or goods, in any way that we are able, if that's consistent with your values. I think most people do derive a sense of joy and fulfillment from being able to give to others. So if that's something that's within your abilities, thinking about that can help us feel more connected to our community as a whole. And I think it's also important to think about how we can contribute to the well-being of our family and friend circles by sharing a little bit about the safety measures that are important to your personal well-being and how family can support you. So when you're perhaps one of the people in your circle who may be more at risk than others when you're maybe going through active cancer treatment or maybe just recently finished cancer treatment, and other people in your life view you as being high risk, they're going to be extremely anxious about connecting with you in some way. And so you being able to educate them on what your doctors have told you is and isn't safe, or what your comfort zone is, then they'll be better able to support you. And so I think this is my final point before we can all share some ideas, but I think this one is worth repeating, even though we've touched on it before. The best and most powerful way to counter feelings of loneliness is to connect with people. And this is going to be an area where being creative is extremely important. And also approaching it with some awareness that this is not going to be as satisfying as a real life connection. Just like, I don't know, if you're used to eating, let's say full fat yogurt, eating fat-free yogurt is not as satisfying, for example, right? So this is going to be not quite the same, but it's better than not having yogurt altogether. And so thinking about whether it's social media channels like Facebook or Instagram or whatever people are using these days, or using the video call platforms that we're all more familiar with now, like FaceTime or Zoom, having people in your life know that you would love to receive not only text messages, but maybe photos and videos throughout the day. This is something I really recommend to folks, especially if you have grandkids, to say, it's sometimes not only that you would like to speak with your grandkids, but you would like to see them. You would like to feel that you're witnessing some aspect of their life. And it's so easy now with smartphones to take a quick video of the grandkids playing, or the grandkids doing their homework, or the grandkids throwing a temper tantrum, as the case might be, and then send that video to grandma or grandpa so that they can feel that they're bearing witness to this time period in their grandchildren's life. It's also an interesting time to use the postal service and maybe do some old-fashioned things like writing letters to people and sending physical cards. Most people sent gifts through the postal service during the holidays. But think about the idea of writing a letter, especially for the young people in your life that probably have never received a letter ever before. And that can be a really fun experience, not only for the adults, but even for the young people in your lives. They can be also writing letters to their aunt or their uncle or their grandma or their grandpa, and having the experience of putting a postage stamp on it, taking it to the mail, doing something that we would not normally do. That could be a fun experience during this unusual time. And so, and then finally, when we think about virtual get-togethers, which many of us are doing via Zoom or other video platforms, think about doing it with a purpose. So not just saying, hey, let's Zoom or let's FaceTime, but think about how you might plan it the way you might plan an activity in normal times, right? Or non-pandemic times. So, you could plan a virtual coffee with a friend where you're both making a cup of coffee at home and sitting there enjoying that cup of coffee and having a conversation through a screen, but trying to replicate what would be the usual experience you would have at a coffee shop just from home. Some people have really transitioned some of their group activities virtually very nicely, like with virtual book clubs or virtual Bible study, and then still enjoy that sense of connection through those activities. Some folks have even tried to join virtual cooking lessons. There's different types of companies that offer all kinds of virtual experiences. I have a page that told me about a virtual wine tasting. Apparently there's companies that will ship you small samples of wine, and then a representative from the company will join you on Zoom and walk you through a tasting virtually. And so I think part of this is sort of researching and looking for ideas that might be fun and engaging for you and for your friends or family that would like to be included. Some families do virtual game nights I've heard, I haven't tried it, but I've heard there's also gaming companies that you can play through Zoom somehow. And certainly plenty of people are hosting virtual celebrations over some type of video platform. Again, the creativity helps us maintain a sense of connection that won't be as satisfying as the full-fat yogurt, but will be better than not having yogurt altogether if for some reason we can't have the real deal right now, which is the boat that we're all in. That is all I have to share. I hope some of that was helpful, but I'm hoping that we can just have all of you comment on what has helped you cope with loneliness during the pandemic, what has helped you stay connected with your families and friends, or also what has been challenging about connecting with family and friends, so we can talk about some ideas and have some discussion.